Welcome back to the front lines. I'm Harper Vance. On this channel, we honor the discipline of the uniform and the justice that follows when that honor is tested. Today, we're following the story of Staff Sergeant Megan George, a tactical leader at Fort Liberty who spent 10 years defending her country, only to find her most dangerous battlefield was her own family's dining room. After years of being the silent provider, Megan uncovers a betrayal that threatens to dismantle her career, her reputation, and her very identity. When the people you're sworn to protect become the predators, how does a soldier execute the ultimate counteroffensive? Stick around, because the way Megan reclaims her life is a tactical masterclass in standing your ground. Let's go back to the moment the perimeter first broke. The drive from Fort Liberty to our family home in Ohio had taken 8 hours, a long stretch of gray asphalt that felt like a tactical march. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Maple Street, my back was stiff and my eyes were burning. It was Thanksgiving. In the Army, you cherish those few moments when the world stops shooting and starts smelling like cinnamon and roasted poultry. I stepped inside, and the sensory assault of home hit me like a flashbang. The air was thick with the scent of pumpkin pie and a 20-pound turkey. From the living room, the roar of a stadium crowd erupted from the television. The Dallas Cowboys were fighting for a first down in the annual NFL Thanksgiving game. "Megan, is that you?" My mother, Linda, called from the kitchen. She immediately pressed an apron into my hands. "You're late. I need the yams mashed and the table set. Your sister Imani is... well, she's had a very stressful week." I was a staff sergeant. I led soldiers through high-stress drills, yet here, I was just the designated laborer. I spent the next 3 hours over a hot stove, my feet aching, listening to my sister's laughter from the basement as she recorded another TikTok. "Just make them happy," I whispered to myself. "Just for today." Around 4, my father, Frank, grunted from his recliner. The smell of his cheap pipe tobacco drifted into the kitchen. "Megan, get in here!" I wiped my hands and walked into the living room. Frank was staring at a stack of mail. "I need those tax folders from the safe in my office. My back is acting up again. Go fetch them. The code is still your birthday." "Sure, Dad," I said. I felt a small pang of pride. He still used my birthday. Maybe there was still affection buried under his gruff exterior. I walked to the office. The room was a tomb, dusty trophies and stale paper. The safe sat in the corner. I knelt and punched in the numbers. The heavy steel door swung open with a reluctant creak. I shuffled through folders until my hand brushed a thick navy blue envelope. The label was formal. Last Will and Testament. Updated 2023. Curiosity is dangerous for a soldier. I've spent the last 5 years pouring my sergeant's pay into this house. I paid the taxes. I paid for the water heater. I kept the lights on when Frank's pension failed. I figured I had a right to see the future. I pulled the document out. My heart began a slow, rhythmic thumping against my ribs. I flipped past the legal jargon, searching for my name. I found it on the 3rd page. Or rather, I found the absence of it. The words turned into jagged glass. Sole beneficiary, Imani George. Every asset, every cent, and the deed to this house, the house I was paying for, was being signed over entirely to my sister. I flipped to the final page. A handwritten note from my mother sat in the margin. "Megan has her military career and her pension. She's stable, she's a rock. But our poor Imani, she's so sensitive, she needs the security of a roof. Megan will understand. She's always been the giver." A cold, numbing sensation washed over me. I felt like I had been punched by a heavyweight. Lying right next to the envelope was the invoice I mailed home 7 days ago. $5,000 for the roof repair. I had worked overtime for months to save that. I had lived like a monk, so they wouldn't worry about a leak. There it was. My $5,000 sat side by side with the document that made me a stranger. I wasn't a daughter. I was a retirement plan, a cash cow with a military ID. From the living room, a roar erupted. "Touchdown!" Frank screamed. The crowd on the TV went wild, mocking the silence of the office. I looked at my hands. They were calloused from gripping a rifle and hauling gear. Then, I looked at the photo on Frank's desk. Imani, holding a $20 Starbucks latte, her nails long and painted with expensive art. She looked pampered and utterly useless. The proverb I heard in Sunday school echoed with the force of a thunderclap. The leech has two daughters. Give and give. My family was the leech, and I was the host they had sucked dry. I didn't cry. Instead, a crystalline clarity took hold. The soldier in me stepped forward. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands didn't shake. I framed the pages of the will, the note, and the roof invoice. Click, click, click. The evidence was secured. The mission had changed. I wasn't here for a holiday anymore. I was behind enemy lines. I tucked the phone away, closed the safe, and walked back toward the turkey, my face a mask of military stone. I walked out of that room, the stinging betrayal settling in my bones. Every step toward the kitchen felt like walking on broken glass. I looked at the turkey, and for the first time, I felt a deep wave of nausea. This wasn't a feast of gratitude. It was a victory dinner for thieves. The battle hadn't even started, but I already knew who was going to lose. I walked into the dining room, the heavy scent of roasted turkey now cloying, making my stomach churn with a bitterness that had nothing to do with the meal. The Dallas Cowboys were fighting for yardage on the television, but the cheering felt miles away. My family sat gathered around the mahogany table, a picture of suburban comfort that I had funded for 5 years. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stepped toward the head of the table and placed the navy blue envelope directly onto the tablecloth, right next to the platter of golden brown bird. The silver forks stopped midair. The clinking of knives against china died, replaced by a silence so thick it felt like the air before a thunderstorm. My mother, Linda, froze with a spoonful of mashed potatoes halfway to her plate. My father, Frank, squinted at the document, his face beginning to flush a deep, angry shade of crimson. Mom, Dad, explain this, I said. My voice was low, level, and colder than the November wind rattling the window panes. Frank didn't look at the will. He looked at me, and it wasn't shame I saw. It was pure fury. He slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the wine glasses. Where the hell did you get that? Did you go through my safe? You've got no manners, Megan. Digging through my private business? That is low, even for you. My mother's hand flew to her chest in a theatrical gesture of distress. Oh, Frank, your heart, she whimpered, her eyes welling with tears that I now realized were her primary weapon. Megan, honey, why are you doing this? It's Thanksgiving. Why would you bring up money and legal talk today? You're making your father upset. They weren't denying it. They weren't apologizing for the betrayal. They were attacking me for catching them. I'm not talking about money, Mom. I'm talking about fairness, I said, my voice rising enough to cut through her whimpering. I've paid the mortgage for 60 months. I just sent $5,000 for the roof last week. Why is my name nowhere on the deed? Why is Imani the sole beneficiary of everything I've built? Linda let out a long, weary sigh, as if I were a difficult child. Oh, Megan, you're so strong. You have your military career, your steady paycheck, and that government pension. You're set. But your sister? Poor Imani. She's sensitive. She hasn't found her path yet. We have to leave the house to her so she's never on the street. As the older sister, it is your duty to sacrifice. That's what family does. Her words were poison, delivered with a smile. My sacrifice was treated as a foregone conclusion, while Imani's laziness was a protected disability. Imani, who hadn't looked up from her phone, finally let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She leaned back, her eyes sharp with eyeliner and malice. Give it a rest, Megan. You're a soldier. You eat off the government's plate. You've probably got more money than you know what to do with, and you're really going to fight me over this dump of a house? You're being so petty. It's honestly gross. That was the boiling point. Petty? I thought of the nights spent in the mud of North Carolina, the ringing in my ears from explosives, and the permanent ache in my knees from carrying gear. To her, my blood and sweat were just a government handout. She sat there, a poster child for the soft life movement, reaping the rewards of a system she despised while sneering at the person who kept the roof over her head. I felt the last thread of my loyalty snap. I stood up straight, my shoulders square, shifting into the rigid authority of a staff sergeant. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their creditor. I looked Frank directly in the eye, ignoring his bluster. The room went dead silent. Even Imani put her phone down, sensing the shift. When I spoke, I used my command voice, the one that stops 100 recruits in their tracks. Fine, I said. The word was a single strike of a hammer. If Imani is the future owner of this house, then she can start acting like the owner today. I'm done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my set of house keys. I held them up, then let them drop. They hit the table with a heavy metallic clink that echoed in the quiet room. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And don't forget to pay the electric bill. It's due on the 15th, and it's over $300 this month because Imani likes to keep the heat at 75 degrees while she's recording her videos. Since I'm no longer a part of the estate plan, I've already canceled the automatic transfer. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. Behind me, the silence broke. Frank began to scream about my insolence, and Linda's sobbing reached a crescendo. Imani was probably already tweeting about how toxic I was. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cold Ohio night, got into my car, and started the engine. For the first time, I wasn't a provider. I was just Megan, and Megan was finally going to take care of herself. My life was finally my own to live. I'm Harper Vance. Listening to Megan's story, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my chest. Have you ever been the strong one in your family, the one everyone leans on, only to realize they're secretly plotting to leave you in the cold? It's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any blade. If you've ever felt the weight of being a family ATM, or had your hard work dismissed by those who should cherish it most, please support Megan's journey of standing her ground. Like this video and comment the word strength below to let her know she isn't alone in this fight. I returned to Fort Liberty, North Carolina, and submerged myself in the grinding routine of military life. The air here was heavy with the scent of pine and jet fuel, a contrast to the deception of Ohio. For 14 days, I was the perfect staff sergeant. I led morning runs and managed logistical manifests until my eyes blurred. It was a deliberate rhythm designed to drown out the silence. Every evening, I would sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the black screen of my phone. A part of me still hoped for a vibration. I wanted to see a text that said, "Did you get back safe?" Or, "We're sorry." But the screen remained dark. The silence was louder than the gunfire on the range. It was the silent treatment, a calculated maneuver to force my compliance. They were waiting for me to break, to crawl back and apologize. But this time, they had underestimated their opponent. The morning of the 15th was cold, the kind of chill that bites through your base layer. It was a significant date, the 10th anniversary of the day I raised my right hand and swore to defend this country. It was the day I truly left home to become someone who mattered. I was 3 miles into a ruck when my phone buzzed against my chest. My heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Frank. My thumb hovered, a flicker of hope sparking. Maybe he remembered the anniversary. I opened the message, and the hope died fast. There was no "Happy Anniversary, Megan." There wasn't even a hello. Instead, there was a jagged screenshot of a past due notice from Wells Fargo. The bold red numbers stared back at me. $2,800. Below the image, Frank had typed a single, brutal sentence. Transfer $2,800 immediately. Do not make me call your commanding officer. I stopped dead on the gravel path. The recruits swerved to avoid a collision, but I didn't see them. I only saw the screen. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't the tears of a wounded child. They were the cold tears of disillusionment. He didn't see a daughter who had spent 10 years serving. He saw an ATM. He saw a late paycheck. To him, my value was exactly $2,800. The threat to call my commander was the final nail. In the military, your reputation is your lifeblood. He was willing to jeopardize my career to secure a payment for a house he had already stolen from me. I stood in the biting wind and took a deep, steadying breath. I channeled the discipline I had learned in the desert. My fingers were steady as I typed the reply. Each word felt like loading a round into a chamber. Hello, Frank. As we discussed on Thanksgiving, I am no longer a resident of that house, nor am I listed as an heir in your recent estate update. Please direct all financial inquiries to the future owner, Imani. I am confident she will find a way to manage her new responsibilities. Have a pleasant day. I hit send. Then, without hesitation, I unlinked my account from the family's overdraft protection and revoked their access. I locked the valve. The well had run dry. 5 minutes later, my phone turned into a live grenade. It was Linda. I didn't answer. I watched the caller ID flash until it rolled to voicemail. When I finally opened the mailbox, there were 3 messages. I put my phone to my ear, bracing for impact. The first message started with Linda's church voice, the sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Megan, honey, please. You've had your little tantrum, but this is serious. I'm having chest pains, and your father is so stressed he can't eat. You're killing us, baby. Just send the money so we can all be a family again. I hit the button for the next message. The sweetness was gone. It was replaced by a shrill, hysterical scream. You ungrateful, selfish brat! How dare you treat us this way after everything we gave you? We gave you life. You owe me your very existence. You want to talk about the will? You're dead to us. You're going to let your own flesh and blood starve because you want to act like a tough soldier? I hope you're happy in your empty apartment because you have no mother anymore. I didn't delete the recordings. I moved them into a protected folder. I knew Linda would call the relatives next. I knew the flying monkeys would be coming for me soon, armed with scripture and guilt. I needed these recordings as a shield. I needed to hear that scream whenever my heart started to soften. I looked over the parade deck as the sun cast long, cold shadows. I was alone, truly alone. But as I tucked my phone away, I felt an ironclad strength settling in. David Goggins' voice echoed, "Stay hard." I wasn't just a daughter. I was a survivor of a long siege, and I had finally broken the line. I turned back toward the barracks, my pace steady and my resolve unshakable. The price of my freedom had been high, but it was worth every cent. My life was finally my own. I was free. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It was a relentless insect on my nightstand. I finally picked it up, seeing Aunt Karen's name. Karen was my mother's sister, a woman who lived for her Sunday morning pew at the Methodist church and the rest of the week's gossip mill. I hadn't even said hello before her voice shrieked into my ear like a rusty siren. Megan, George, I am appalled. I just got off the phone with your mother. She's in hysterics, Megan. How can you be so cold? To leave your own parents to starve over a few measly dollars. Did you forget everything you were taught? Does honor thy father and mother mean nothing to the United States Army? I squeezed my eyes shut, rubbing my temple. Aunt Karen, you don't have the full story. They cut me out of the will while I was paying the mortgage. I just sent $5,000 for roof repairs. I don't want to hear your excuses, she barked, cutting me off with the ease of a woman who never listens. There is no excuse for turning your back on blood. You're arrogant, Megan. That uniform has gone to your head. You think you're better than us because you have a rank? Pride goeth before a fall, young lady. You need to ask for forgiveness and send that money today. The irony was thick. Aunt Karen hadn't paid back the $3,000 she'd borrowed from my father for her failing business, yet here she was, the judge of my morality. You can't reason with a person who uses scripture as a bludgeon while their own hands are dirty. I simply hung up, the silence of the room feeling more like a vacuum than a sanctuary. By sunset, the digital flying monkeys, the term for the cronies of a narcissist, were in full flight. My friend Sarah sent me a screenshot from Facebook. It was a post from my mother, Linda. She had posted a photo of herself clutching a Bible and dabbing at her eyes. It was so staged it belonged on a soap opera. The caption read, "A mother's heart is shattered. We sacrificed everything to raise her. Now, when our health is failing and the bills are piling up, she has turned her back on us. She has blocked our calls and left us in the dark. Please, church family, pray for my daughter, Megan George. Pray that she finds her way back to the path of righteousness. The comments section was a cesspool of indignation. People I'd known since I was a toddler were calling me Staff Sergeant Heartless and an embarrassment to the flag. Not one of them asked why a 32-year-old woman with a perfect service record would suddenly walk away. They didn't want the truth, they wanted the drama. Then came the heavy artillery. Imani. My sister used TikTok, where her audience was prone to reflexive outrage. Sarah sent me the link. Imani was on camera, using a filter that made her look like a tearful angel. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for being so quiet. My family's going through something traumatic. My older sister, she's a soldier making 6 figures, is trying to ruin us. She's threatening to kick us out of our home because she wants the equity. I'm currently unemployed due to anxiety, and instead of helping, she's gone cold. It's hard to realize that the person you looked up to is a monster. Why are the wealthy so greedy?" The video was viral. 3,000 likes. Hundreds of comments offering support and condemning the selfish sister. Imani sat there, a professional victim, erasing 5 years of my labor with a 60-second clip. She didn't mention the $5,000 roof. She didn't mention the fact that she was the one getting the house. She just twisted the knife. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, the blue light of my phone the only thing illuminating the room. The silence felt heavy. I realized my family didn't want my love. They wanted my compliance. They were willing to burn my reputation to the ground, the only thing I truly owned, just to force me back into my role as the family ATM. A quote from Marcus Aurelius drifted through my mind. "The opinion of others is not your reality." I repeated it like a mantra, letting the words settle the storm in my gut. I wasn't going to fight them in the comments. I was done explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. One by one, I opened the apps. I blocked Aunt Karen's number. I blocked my mother on Facebook. I blocked Imani on everything. Each click felt like a heavy door slamming shut. I was sealing the exits, choosing a lonely peace over a war. The tears finally came then, not because I missed them, but because I finally accepted that they were never the people I wanted them to be. I was a staff sergeant, but in that moment, I was just a woman who realized she was truly alone. I wiped my face with a calloused hand and stood up. I had a morning formation at 500 hours. The world was going to keep turning. I was free. No one would ever control my life again. This was my new beginning. I won. Saturday afternoon at Fort Liberty usually possessed a pine-scented quiet that allowed the soul to catch up with the body. I was in my apartment, meticulously cleaning my dress uniform for inspection. The rhythmic brush against the wool was meditation. In the Army, discipline is the only thing that keeps chaos at bay. I had spent the week in a state of ironclad focus, keeping the digital noise of my family locked behind a wall of blocked numbers. My home was my fortress, the only place where I didn't have to be a provider. Then, the landline on the counter chirped, shattering the silence. I picked it up, expecting a call from the motor pool. Instead, it was Mike, the building receptionist. His voice was strained with professional panic. "Staff Sergeant George, I am so sorry to bother you, but there are 3 people in the lobby. They claim to be family. They're extremely agitated. The gentleman is shouting at me, demanding a spare key to your unit. He says he has a right to enter." The blood in my veins turned to slush. They had driven 8 hours, crossing 3 state lines, fueled by entitlement and the need to reclaim their ATM. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to lay siege to my sanctuary. "Do not give them anything, Mike. Keep the elevator locked. I'm coming down," I said. I didn't change out of my workout gear. I laced up my boots, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The elevator ride felt like a descent into a combat zone. When the doors slid open with an electronic chime, the assault began. I saw them, a discordant stain in the modern lobby. Frank was standing at the desk, his face a terrifying shade of purple, his finger jabbing toward Mike's face. My mother, Linda, was sitting on a sofa, her head in her hands, performing the role of the tragic matriarch for other residents. Imani was leaning against the wall, eyes glued to her phone, her jaw moving in a slow grind as she chewed neon green gum. The moment Frank saw me, he lunged. "There she is! There's the ungrateful brat," he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Linda was on her feet, rushing toward me with arms outstretched. She caught me in a hug that felt like the coils of a boa constrictor, suffocating and designed to crush resistance. "Megan, baby, please," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Look at what you're doing to us. You're making a scene. Just come home. Let's go to your place and talk like a real family." I didn't hug her back. I firmly unhooked her arms and stepped back to reclaim my personal space. "What are you doing here, Mom? How did you get my address?" Frank pushed past her, standing so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath. He didn't care about the neighbors or cameras. He only cared about leverage. "I don't give a damn about how we got here. You think you can shut us out? You think you can stop the money and walk away after everything we did? You owe me, Megan. I raised you. Now, you're going to open your phone and transfer $3,000 for the mortgage and bills you missed. Then, you're going to apologize to your mother." The audacity was breathtaking. There was no mention of the will or the roof I had just repaired, just a demand for more blood from a stone they had already tried to crush. Imani didn't even look up as she spoke. "Seriously, Megan, just pay it. I'm starving, and Dad's been screaming in the car for hours. You're being so extra right now." Frank's hand shot out, his fingers hooking into my collar as if he were going to drag me. It was a violation of every boundary I possessed. In that moment, the daughter in me finally died. The part that craved their approval evaporated, replaced by the cold clarity of a staff sergeant. I didn't strike him. I stood my ground, my posture snapping into a rigid form. I channeled every ounce of authority I had and unleashed my command voice. "Stop! Step back! Do not touch me again!" The lobby went into a vacuum of silence. Frank's hand recoiled as if he had been burned. He stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. He had never seen me like this. He had only seen the servant. "This is my home," I said, my voice low and lethal. "You are not invited. You are trespassing. Mike, if these people are not out of this building in 5 minutes, call 911 and report harassment. I want them trespassed permanently." Frank's face twisted into something demonic. He realized the money was gone, and his only remaining weapon was destruction. As he turned to leave, he leaned in close, his voice a hissed promise of ruin. "You think you're so tough in that uniform? We'll see how tough you are when I call your colonel and tell him you're a mentally unstable thief who's abusing her parents. I'll burn your career to the ground. Enjoy your empty life." He spat on the floor and walked out, leaving me standing in the center of my shattered piece. I watched the glass doors swing shut behind them, knowing the worst was yet to come. Monday morning at Fort Liberty arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The humid North Carolina air clung to my skin as I walked toward the company commander's office. I had a bad feeling in my gut, a tactical instinct that told me the perimeter had been breached. The encounter at the lobby on Saturday hadn't been the end. It was just the reconnaissance before the main assault. When I entered the office, the atmosphere was thick with a professional silence. My captain sat behind his desk, looking at a stack of papers with an expression that shifted between concern and clinical detachment. "Staff Sergeant George, take a seat," he said. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were searching for something in mine. "We received a series of disturbing calls over the weekend. From your father, Frank, and your mother, Linda. They've made very serious allegations regarding your mental health. They're claiming you have untreated post-traumatic stress disorder, that you've expressed suicidal ideation, and that you've shown aggressive tendencies toward your family. They've requested that the unit intervene for your own safety." I felt the air leave my lungs. For a second, the room tilted. I gripped the fabric of my trousers, my knuckles turning white as I fought the urge to let the world spin. This was it. The nuclear option. They weren't just after my money anymore. They were trying to dismantle my identity. In the military, a report like this triggers a cascade of investigations. It could freeze my security clearance, stop my promotion, and end a career I'd built with blood and sweat. They knew exactly where to strike. They wanted to kill the soldier to get back the servant. Sir, those reports are entirely fabricated, I said, my voice sounding like gravel. This is retaliation for me cutting off financial support. The captain sighed, tapping his pen. I want to believe you, Megan. Your record is flawless. But a formal report from family carries weight. You'll need to undergo an evaluation, and we'll have to put a temporary hold on your weapons access. It's protocol. I walked out of that office feeling like a ghost. But the assault wasn't over. When I reached my mail slot later that afternoon, there was a priority envelope waiting for me. It was from a low-rent law office in Ohio. Inside was a letter dripping with hollow legal jargon. It demanded immediate reimbursement of child-rearing costs and a monthly alimony payment of $2,000 for my parents. It threatened to sue for emotional distress if I didn't comply within 7 days. They were trying to bleed me dry through the legal system, gambling on the fact that I'd be too afraid of a scandal to fight back. Instead of breaking, I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. The daughter who wanted to be loved had been buried in the lobby on Saturday. Only the staff sergeant remained. I gathered my folders, the bank statements from the last 5 years, the invoices for the $5,000 roof repair, the screenshots of Frank's threats, and the recordings of Linda's hysterical screams. I also included the photograph I had taken of the safe, showing the will that left everything to Imani. I took the entire file to the office of the Judge Advocate General. I was granted an appointment with a major, a sharp-eyed woman who had seen every type of family drama. I sat in her office and laid out the reality of my life. I didn't cry. I presented the facts as if I were delivering a sit-rep in a combat zone. The major spent 30 minutes reviewing the bank records and listening to the recordings. When she got to the part where Linda screamed that I was dead to her, the major paused the recording and looked at me. Her expression was one of profound disgust for the people who shared my DNA. Staff Sergeant, she said, her voice firm, let me be very clear. You do not owe these people a single cent. In fact, based on the evidence of these threats and the fraudulent reports, you have a strong case for a civil suit. They are weaponizing the military's protocols to extort you. That is a crime. She helped me draft an official response. It wasn't a letter of negotiation. It was a cease and desist. It stated that any further contact with me or my military command would result in immediate legal action and a restraining order. I sat there and watched her print it out on the official JAG letterhead. I walked to the post office on base and held the envelope for a moment. This was the final bridge. Once I dropped this in the slot, there was no going back. I signed the document with a steady hand. Megan George. Beneath my name, I didn't write daughter. I wrote, a stranger you once used. I let the envelope go. The sound of it hitting the bottom was satisfying. I walked back into the sunlight, feeling the weight of the world lifting. I was no longer an ATM. I was a soldier, and I was going to win. The George family had chosen the nuclear option, but they forgot one thing. I was the one who knew how to survive the fallout. Watching Megan's own family try to weaponize her mental health and sabotage the career she bled for is enough to make anyone's blood run cold. They didn't just want her money. They wanted to destroy her reputation to force her back into a cage. It's the ultimate betrayal. If you've ever had to defend your life's work against the very people who were supposed to protect you, or if Megan's courage in the face of such malice moved you, please support her journey. Like this story and comment the word honor below to show her that her integrity is worth more than their greed. The silence in my apartment at Fort Liberty was a physical presence, an unyielding weight that settled into the corners like heavy morning fog. For 2 weeks after the major helped me fire that legal warning shot, the quiet was terrifying. I was a soldier trained for noise, rifles, transport planes, and the hum of command. But the lack of a vibrating phone was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I reached for it at midnight, my thumb hovering over Mom before the memory of the false allegations slapped me back to reality. I was an addict going through withdrawal. I didn't miss them. I missed the identity of the martyr. I missed holding a sinking ship together. Sitting with a mug of tea, I realized being needed isn't the same as being loved. I was learning to exist in the stillness without an invoice to define me. In Ohio, the ship was going under. Without my $2,800, the glass house on Maple Street began to shatter. Frank's pension was a joke against inflation, and the variable rate mortgage devoured their remaining cash. The kitchen that used to smell like pumpkin pie now smelled of desperation. Linda huddled over her laptop. I saw it on social media through the eyes of a burner account. She was gutting the house. She posted photos of the ceramic collection I'd bought her for her 50th birthday, listing the set for $50 on Facebook Marketplace. She posted the television from the living room and even the antique dresser from the guest room. Her status updates were a parade of professional victimhood. "The world is so cold to the elderly," she wrote, her words a transparent plea for a charity that never came. The church neighbors, the ones who had been so quick to judge me on Facebook, had suddenly developed a convenient case of amnesia. In America, everyone loves a tragedy until it starts asking for a loan. Imani was the one truly drowning in the shallow end. The golden child was finding out that gold doesn't pay for a grande latte when the credit card is maxed out. Sarah sent me a text about it, a brief cutting update from someone who'd seen her at the Starbucks downtown. Imani had stood there, her nails still perfectly manicured but her face pale, as the barista handed back her card with a sympathetic, "I'm sorry, it's declined." The soft life she had curated on TikTok was evaporating, leaving behind a 26-year-old woman with no skills and a mountain of consumer debt. But the real rot was inside the house. Frank, deprived of his favorite punching bag, had finally turned his sights on his darling Imani. The man who had called her sensitive and fragile to justify my exploitation was now screaming at her to get a job at the local warehouse. "You're a parasite," he would shout, the same words he'd hissed at me, now landing on the daughter he'd once shielded. The golden pedestal had crumbled, and she was being crushed by the debris. 3 months later, the end arrived in the form of a single image. A former neighbor, a man who had always liked me, sent an email with the subject line, "Thought you should know." I opened the attachment while sitting in the base cafeteria, the sound of soldiers laughing all around me. It was a photo of number 42 Maple Street. The lawn was a mess, the grass was a foot high, choked with brown weeds, a far cry from the manicured turf I used to pay a landscaping crew to maintain. And there, driven deep into the dead soil of the front yard, was a sign from the bank. It was cold, corporate, and final. Foreclosure. Auction. The bank didn't care about family tradition or fragile daughters. They only cared about the bottom line, and without my sergeant's pay to grease the wheels, the machinery of debt had simply ground them up. I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for the wave of grief to hit. I expected to feel the familiar tug of guilt, the urge to call the bank and beg for a workout plan to save my parents' roof. But as the seconds ticked by, all I felt was a profound, crystalline sense of lightness. The prison was gone. The house that had been built on my blood and sweat was being reclaimed by the institutions. It was a funeral for a lie I had been telling myself for a decade. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I simply deleted the email, finished my coffee, and walked back to my unit. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't owe a single person on this planet an explanation or a dollar. I was mired in a piece that had been bought at a terrible price, but as I looked up at the flag snapping in the wind, I knew it was the best money I had ever spent. My life was finally my own. The collapse was complete, and from the ruins, I was finally starting to grow. I breathed in the cold North Carolina air, feeling the last threads of the George family's influence dissolve into the pine-scented wind. I was free. I was finally truly free now. The drumming rain against my window was the only sound, a relentless heartbeat in sync with my pulsing temples. It was Tuesday in North Carolina. The air was thick with damp pine and black coffee. My phone sat on the nightstand, erupting into life with an unknown number. My tactical instinct told me who it was before I even picked it up. I let it ring for 10 seconds, watching the light flicker in the shadows before I finally pressed the phone to my ear. I didn't say a word. I simply waited. The silence was broken by the ragged, high-pitched sobbing of my sister, Imani. "Megan, Megan, please don't hang up on me, she gasped, her voice sounding thin and brittle, stripped of the arrogance she'd worn during that Thanksgiving dinner. Everything is gone, Megan. The bank. They took the house. Mom and Dad had to move into that trailer park on the south side. It's a nightmare. It smells like mold and cigarettes, and Dad is just sitting there in the dark. I was staying with a friend, couch surfing. But her parents kicked me out today. I have nowhere to go. I'm sitting in my car at a gas station, and I don't even have $10 for a meal. Please, you're my big sister. You have that steady sergeant's pay and that big apartment. You can't just let me rot. I promise I'll be better. Just let me stay with you for a while. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, the old Megan, the girl who had been trained since birth to be the family's savior, almost spoke. The words were there, ready to offer a bus ticket and a place to sleep. My biological wiring was screaming at me to fix the mess, to be the hero so that maybe they would finally love me. But then the ghost of that navy blue envelope flashed in my mind. I saw the words, sole beneficiary, written in my mother's deceptive hand. I felt the phantom pressure of Frank's fingers hooking into my collar in the lobby, his face twisted with entitlement. I realized that if I said yes now, I wasn't being a loving sister. I was providing the hit of enabling that would keep Imani a permanent parasite. She didn't need a couch. She needed to hit the rock bottom she had earned. Imani, I said, my voice as level and cold as the steel of my service rifle. The answer is no. I cannot help you. The sobbing stopped instantly. It was a transition so fast it was terrifying. The mask of the victim falling away to reveal the predator. It was the classic tactic of hoovering, the attempt to suck a victim back into the cycle of abuse. What do you mean you can't? She spat, her voice suddenly sharp. You're a soldier. You swear to protect strangers, but you won't protect your own flesh and blood. You're sitting there in your nice apartment while I'm freezing in a parking lot. You're evil, Megan. You're a cold-blooded monster. I hope you rot and die alone. You're dead to us. I am not killing you, Imani, I replied, the truth feeling like a heavy stone. I am simply stopping the long, slow process of killing myself just to feed you. You are 26 years old. You have 2 hands, 2 feet, and a diploma. The world is full of jobs, and it's time you found one. Do not call this number again. I pressed the end button and set the phone face down. My hands were shaking so violently I had to sit on them. Hot, silent tears streamed down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears for the girl I used to be, the one who finally died tonight. I walked to my desk and pulled out my journal. I didn't write to Imani or about Frank. I wrote a letter to the version of my parents that I had spent 30 years pretending existed. I wrote out their names, Frank and Linda George, and I wrote the words I never thought I would say. I forgive you. I wrote it over and over until the ink blurred. I didn't forgive them because they had changed or because they deserved it. I forgave them because I refused to carry their greed and their hatred in my marrow for another second. I was returning the burden to the people who owned it. I was breaking the trauma bond with the stroke of a pen. I tore the page from the book and walked onto my small balcony. The North Carolina rain was still falling, a cool mist against my skin. I placed the paper into a small metal bowl and struck a match. The flame bloomed, a bright orange that devoured the words and the weight they carried. I watched the black ashes swirl up into the night, dissolving into the pine-scented wind until there was nothing left but the smell of smoke and the sound of the storm. As the last spark died out, the crushing pressure in my chest finally vanished. I wasn't a daughter, a protector, or a victim anymore. I was just Megan. And for the first time in 32 years, being just Megan was finally enough. I was truly free. My life belonged to me. I was home. I was whole. 1 year had passed since I watched the black ashes of my past dissolve into the North Carolina night. The world looked different now, colored not by the gray haze of obligation, but by the vibrant, steady light of a life I had built for myself. I stood on the sidewalk of a quiet, tree-lined street, looking at the small bungalow that sat like a jewel in the afternoon sun. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect. The exterior was painted a soft, calming pastel blue, with white trim and a wide front porch that practically begged for a rocking chair. This was my home. I had secured it through a VA loan, a benefit earned through 10 years of sacrifice, allowing me to close the deal with 0% down payment. For the first time in my 32 years, I wasn't paying for someone else's roof. I wasn't pouring my sergeant's pay into a bottomless pit of someone else's greed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, gleaming key. I walked up the steps, my boots making a solid, rhythmic sound on the wood. I slid the key into the deadbolt and turned it. The click was loud, crisp, and final. It was the sound of 1,000 chains falling away. I stepped inside, and the air smelled of fresh paint, lemon wax, and peace. The housewarming party that weekend was a symphony of laughter that filled every corner of my new sanctuary. There was no Aunt Karen to preach at me, no Linda to manipulate me with staged tears, and no Frank to demand $3,000 for a failing mortgage. Instead, the house was packed with my chosen family. Sarah was there, her laugh echoing through the kitchen as she helped me arrange a platter of sliders and buffalo wings. Mike was there too, the man who had once been the quiet receptionist at my old apartment building. We had started as strangers, then became friends, and now he was the person who held my hand when the world felt too loud. My old squad mates from the unit were crowded into the living room, their voices booming as they debated the upcoming NFL season. We raised our glasses of cold beer in a toast that made my throat tighten with a different kind of emotion. "To Megan," Sarah shouted, her eyes bright with pride. "To freedom, and to the best damn house in North Carolina." We drank to that, and as I looked around the room, I realized that Oprah Winfrey was right. Blood might be a biological fact, but it was the least of what made a family. A real family was a place where you were safe, where you were valued for who you were, and where love didn't come with an expiration date or a price tag. In a quiet moment on the porch, away from the music and the heat of the kitchen, Sarah joined me. She leaned against the railing, her face softened by the glow of the porch light. She hesitated for a second, then pulled out her phone. "I heard something from Ohio today," she said, her voice low. "My cousin still lives near the old neighborhood. She saw your folks." I took a slow breath, bracing myself, but the old panic didn't come. I felt nothing but a distant, clinical curiosity. "They're in that trailer park on the south side of town now," Sarah continued, "living in an old double-wide that's seen better days. And Imani. She's working the night shift as a cashier at the Walmart Supercenter. Apparently she's been there for 6 months. No more TikTok videos about the soft life, Megan. She looks tired. She looks like she's finally growing up the hard way." I nodded slowly, looking out at the dark silhouette of the trees. I didn't feel a surge of joy at their misery, nor did I feel the urge to send a check. I simply felt the heavy, undeniable weight of karma. They had chosen their path, and Imani was finally learning the lesson I had learned at 18. That the world doesn't owe you a living just because you exist. "I hope they find a way to be okay," I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. But they were no longer my ghosts to carry. The party eventually faded into the night, the last of my friends driving away with honks and waves. Mike stayed to help me clear the remaining plates, his presence a steady, warm comfort. When he finally kissed me goodnight and left, I was alone in the silence. But it wasn't the terrifying silence of that empty apartment a year ago. It was the silence of a fortress. I walked through my home, turning off the lights one by one. I climbed into my bed, the sheets smelling of lavender and fresh air. I lay there in the silver moonlight, my body feeling heavy and relaxed. For 30 years, I had been a soldier on guard duty, watching over the dreams of people who would have left me for dead. Tonight, I was just Megan. There were no nightmares of navy blue envelopes or screaming voicemails. I closed my eyes and sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. The kind of sleep that only comes to a person who has finally fulfilled their most sacred duty, the duty to save their own soul. The dawn would come in a few hours, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to see it. I was home. The auditorium at Fort Liberty was filled with the low, restless hum of hundreds of young soldiers. Most were barely out of basic training, their uniforms still crisp and their eyes wide with the nervous energy of a new beginning. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain for a brief moment, adjusting the sleeves of my service uniform. My rank as a staff sergeant was a mark of my service, but the confidence I felt today had nothing to do with the stripes on my arm. It came from the peace in my soul. I stepped onto the stage, and the hum of the crowd died down instantly. Behind me, a large projector screen displayed the title of my seminar, Financial Readiness and Setting Family Boundaries. I wasn't there to teach them how to fire a weapon or navigate a forest. I was there to teach them exactly how to protect their future from the people they loved the most. I started by telling them my story. I didn't hide the ugly details. I spoke about the $2,800 monthly payments, the $5,000 roof, and the betrayal of the will. I watched as many of the young faces in the front row began to shift from curiosity to recognition. I saw my younger self in their eyes. The boys and girls who believed that sending every cent home was the only way to prove their loyalty. "Listen to me carefully," I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall, steady and strong. "The most courageous act you will ever perform in this uniform isn't going to be on a battlefield. It will be the moment you stand up to the people who raised you and say no when they try to exploit your service. Bravery isn't just a medal you pin to your chest. It's the strength to protect your boundaries when they are being weaponized against you in the name of filial duty. You are soldiers, but you are also individuals with a right to a life of your own. You cannot save anyone else if you allow yourself to be dismantled. Love your families, support them when they are truly in need, but never allow your honor to be turned into an ATM. If you destroy your own future to fund their greed, you aren't being a hero. You're being a victim." The silence was heavy, a profound moment of shared understanding. Then, the applause started. A thundering, rhythmic sound that shook the walls. It was the sound of a generation realizing they had the permission to be free. After the seminar ended, I stayed behind to answer questions. A young private, a girl who couldn't have been more than 19, approached me timidly. Her eyes were red, and she was clutching her notebook as if it were a life raft. "Staff Sergeant George," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Thank you. My brother. He's been demanding I pay the monthly installment for his new truck. He said it was my duty because I'm the one with the steady paycheck now. I've been so stressed I couldn't sleep. But after hearing you, I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to tell him he has to figure it out himself." I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her small frame. "Do it," I said softly. "It's going to hurt at first. He might call you names, and your parents might take his side. But the freedom you'll feel on the other side of that phone call is priceless. You are worth more than a car payment, Private. Remember that." She nodded, a small determined smile breaking through her tears, and walked away with her head held higher. In that moment, I knew I had finally won my war. My legacy wouldn't be a house in Ohio. It would be the freedom of every soldier who decided to stop being a sacrifice. The sun was setting as I drove away from the base, casting a brilliant, golden light across the North Carolina landscape. The sky was a masterpiece of deep oranges and vibrant purples, a silent celebration of the day's end. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool evening air fill the car. I turned on the radio, and a country song about long roads and second chances began to play loudly. There were no ghosts in the rearview mirror. There were no looming deadlines or frantic messages from a trailer park in Ohio. I thought about the quote by Maya Angelou that I'd pinned to my fridge. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." I hadn't just survived the storm, I'd learned how to use the wind to fly. I pulled into the driveway of my little blue bungalow, the place where I finally belonged. As I turned off the engine, I looked at the house and smiled. I wasn't the girl who was always on guard anymore. I was a woman who had come home to herself. Happiness wasn't something I had to wait to inherit. It was something I had built with my own two hands. The war was over. I was finally truly home and free. Today, it was my final victory. I am now whole, strong, and finally, completely me. The story of Megan George serves as a vital reminder that boundaries are not walls built for exclusion, but gates maintained for self-preservation. Meghan's triumph teaches that financial literacy is a soldier's ultimate shield. True honor never demands the destruction of one's own future to subsidize the irresponsibility of others. To care for family effectively, an individual must first ensure their own stability and health. By securing her foundation, Meghan transitioned from a victim to a mentor, proving that personal value is never dictated by another's entitlement. Loyalty to oneself is where true service begins. This is your lasting legacy. As the final chapter of Meghan's journey concludes, the narrator invites the audience to reflect on their own paths. Harper Vance knows that many of you carry similar burdens of silent sacrifice. If Meghan's resilience moved you to protect your peace, please support this channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Join this growing community of survivors by commenting the word legacy in the section below. Your support ensures that stories of strength and justice continue to be told. Stand with Meghan and honor your own journey today. Thanks for listening, and remember, your freedom is worth every single cent.